Just a brief introduction for Dr. Swanson. Um, Dr. Swanson's vocation is as a professor at Creighton University, where he's engaged in research and teaching in the field of B cell biology, the cells that make antibodies. Besides his main occupation, Dr. Swanson spends time tending his backyard gardens and restoring a native prairie remnant in the Loess Hills of western Iowa, his avocations. His childhood and adult experiences in nature have informed his understanding of how spending time outdoors improves physical, mental, and spiritual health. Dr. Swanson's vocational and avocational interests have recently intersected with his development of a medical humanities course at Creighton, discussing the growing field of nature prescription, healthcare providers writing prescriptions to spend time in nature, and the benefits of being actively engaged in ecosystem restoration to individual, community, and ecosystem health. Dr. Swanson, please take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for joining me today. Hopefully you can hear me just fine and you can see my screen. I'm assuming that I will be told that you can't if that's the case. And so, I really am grateful for this opportunity to join you today. And a special thanks to the Northwest Iowa group, the Sierra Club, not only for hosting this event, but also sort of on a personal note, just a note of gratitude for your generosity and fellowship when, Kelly's here. So I was a hiker on the low high trek in the spring of 2023. And we visited the Great Northern Loess Hills area, Broken Kettle Grasslands, Heenda Hills, Five Ridge Prairie, Stone State Park. And, you provided us lunch at Stone State Park. And so for that, I'm grateful. And this is my small way of maybe returning the favor. So I'm going to tell you a story about my experience as restoring a native Loess Hills prairie remnant. This land is located in northern Harrison County, basically between Mondayman and Pisgah, if you're familiar with those areas. And I think to kind of get a feel for why I'm doing this, you have to know a little bit about my history. And I think for those of you who are involved in, education, environmental education, or ecological restoration or land management, you'll see that those early childhood and early adult experiences that I'm sharing with you were really formative for me and kind of led me to this place. So my story in prairie restoration really begins with this woman, Olivia Urban Dodge. I grew up in Minnesota, in West St. Paul, and that is Dakota County. And by happenstance of birth, if I use my marker here, let's see if I can. There we go.
Patrick, I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I can't see your screen.
I'm not sure.
You cannot.
Your screen.
Okay, so that's important. So let's try this again.
I'm trying to see it in your glasses, but.
Okay, no, that's important. Let's see. I want to go to the Zoom meeting and I want to share my screen. There we go. Is it sharing?
There we go.
There we
Yes.
go.
Okay, now that makes a difference. I'm glad somebody spoke up. Here we go. All right. So you heard the beginning, but so this is where I really talk about my start. And Olivia Urban Dodge was a neighbor of ours, and where I kind of grew up is sort of where this star was. I'm going to use the laser pointer here, make it a little bit easier to see, on Delaware. And she had a beautiful estate home down here, or up here rather, in this corner. And the story goes that in about 1965, 66, the city wanted to extend the sewer service out to this part of the county. And in order to pay for it, they levied an assessment on all the property owners in the area. And this area back here was mostly agricultural, what my dad called truck farms. We would call them like smallholder farms now. There were some farmsteads. And I think Mrs. Dodge was very concerned about the prospect of losing all of this agricultural land and this open space. So she bought it all. And it was about almost a quarter section of land, about 110 acres. But then she did something remarkable. She established it as a nature center. And it was founded in 1967. And this nature center, the Dodge Nature Center, partnered with the local school districts to provide environmental education. And one of the first things that I remember doing as a kid through one of these events was seeding a part of the crop ground to native prairie. And then some years later, I think it was middle school for me, I participated in a prescribed burn. And that was quite exciting. And, you know, for middle schoolers, I'm not sure what's more wild, the fire or the kids. And I think, you know, it was probably a little bit too dangerous for us to be there, but it made its mark. And I don't think they do it anymore, or probably never did it afterwards. But, you know, that was quite an education. And through that, I learned some basic prairie restoration and management techniques. And because these were all new flowers, I wanted to learn them. And I learned a little bit more about prairie dynamics. And I've come back over the years to kind of follow this. And lupin was in that seed mix, and it still blooms every spring. Now, the other thing that they did was they had a summer gardening program, and I participated in that in 2 summers. And I don't remember the face or the name, but I remember the old farmer with the big blue bib overalls teaching me everything he knew about growing vegetables organically. And it's something that I took with me, and I felt very strongly as an adult that it taught me a lot about self-reliance and being able to grow my own food. And I also kind of, after long years of reflection, saw what one person with means of dedication can do to make a difference. Mrs. Dodge, in establishing this nature center, really had ripple effects through now 3 generations, and I was probably the first. And you have to understand that being next to this nature center meant I had this big, wide area to roam, to run around. I spent hours back there, and either by myself or with my sister or my friends. And it was just a wonderful way to grow up. And my parents had one of those chuck wagon, triangle dinner bells that they would ring and call us in. And sometimes we'd listen, and maybe sometimes we didn't. But one of the things that I think that really showed me was this value of a natural area as a place to explore, imagine, and wonder, a roaming place. And this is kind of an important concept for me because it was something that came to be an important feature of what I wanted to be able to offer my kids. I'll tell you that later. So fast forward now, I went to finish college and decided to go to graduate school at the University of Michigan. And it was a great place to study, but it was very stressful, filled with anxiety, doubt, uncertainty, despair, the weight of expectations, identity, all of those kind of big emotions that you have in your 20s when you're trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing, whether you're doing the right thing, whether you're doing anything. What I found myself, some of the only relief that I found for myself was to kind of escape into nature. And Ann Arbor is really pretty cool because it has this botanical gardens, the Nichols Arboretum and the botanical gardens right next door to the campus. And so I would find myself stealing away time between experiments. I was in a chemistry department doing my graduate research. And, one of the things that I felt like it did was draw me out of myself. It gave me space and place and time to, release some of this anxiety. And I really felt like it improved my mental health. I knew, intuitively that it wasn't solving any of my problems, but it gave me sort of this energy to return kind of to the fight. So I think there's somebody who might need to be muted if you can do that. I really got to understand that nature was really good for me. Nature was really good for me. And so with that, there was still a certain sense of maybe emptiness or, something missing. And it really felt like I was not really returning the favor that I was receiving from, from nature for this boost to my mental health. And as it turned out, fortuitously, my roommate, when I was a graduate student, my first year, he was a little bit older than me. He was a school teacher, and he was a member of the Nature Conservancy. And I hadn't heard of the Nature Conservancy before that. And I was thumbing through the magazine and seeing some of the things that they do. And I was really impressed with this idea of their ability to buy these, last great places, these wonderful ecological gems, and try to protect and restore them. And it turned out they had recently acquired a property south of Ann Arbor, about an hour, called Ives Road Fen. And they were working on the restoration of this property. And for those of you who don't know what a fen is, it's a groundwater fed wetland. And in this hydrology scheme, you have kind of a recharge area where rainwater percolates through a permeable layer like limestone, hits an impermeable layer, and then comes out someplace. And that's what this fen was. And it has all sorts of really interesting wet prairie plants and in unusual species like carnivorous plants. And this area was ditched in the mistaken notion that you could make it suitable for farming, but it always stayed wet because the water was coming up out of the ground. But one of the problems was that altered the hydrology, and in the ditching process created all this spoil that was colonized by invasive species. And the one that we spent most of the time removing was glossy buckthorn. And so I went to some of these work days, and we worked on filling the ditches and cutting the buckthorn back and treating it. And it was really a wonderful experience. I had camaraderie. You could really see the effects of a group of people working to restore the landscape, and just really made me feel good. It made me feel like I was giving something back. And I was, didn't have words for it yet, but it was really the nascent understanding of blending recreation and restoration. And so that ends up kind of becoming merged in my lexicon later on as restorative recreation, the benefit to place and to the person. So, one of the other things, of course, is loss of fire, and fires are really important for prairie ecosystems, and they've made a huge amount of progress on restoring that area. So I did end up finishing graduate school and on to my next location, which ended up being in Baltimore. And I attended Johns Hopkins, and I wanted to kind of continue that idea of being able to work at these natural areas. It gave me an opportunity to see something different and get outside and out of the lab and work with my hands and work with other people. And it turns out that the East Coast has prairies, and we don't often think of it that way because we think of most of the East Coast as being forested. But there's some really interesting grassland types out there. And the one that is in Northwest Baltimore, maybe 30 minutes from downtown, is this place called Soldier's Delight Natural Area. And it's part of what's called a serpentine barrens. And these grasslands occur on these outcrops of serpentine soils, which have high concentrations of heavy metals like iron and chromium and cobalt. And so those tend to disfavor the growth of trees, have pretty thin soils, and were historically kept open with fire and grazing. But with the cessation of fire, they did start having invading trees, mostly things like eastern red cedar and slash pine and other invasives that were less pleasant. So I would go out there and spend the work days, cutting brush basically, or cutting trees. And so that was really pleasant. And I spent 4 years there, and then came to Omaha, where I took a faculty position at Creighton. And again, wanted to kind of continue this process of working on prairie restoration. And I quickly discovered Hitchcock Nature Center and found all sorts of, neat plants that I'd never seen before, like this prairie larkspur and porcupine grass along the Badger Ridge. Some of you may recognize that in these oak savannas. And I met Chad Gravy, and they were in the early days of kind of really doing more active restoration Hitchcock Nature Center, and that was really enjoyable. I spent some time at Fontenelle Forest, working in the oak savannas as well. But I didn't really feel like I spent enough time. I wanted to remind people, because there might be some people who aren't familiar with Loess Hills. I think most of you are, but it's found, really along the entire western edge of Iowa, and stretching along the Missouri River there. And these were formed during and after the last ice age, as silts that were washed off the glaciers were blown into dunes of these fine soils, and then sculpted by wind and erosion into all of these unusual features and stabilized by grasses. So, when Lewis and Clark came through here, they had, all of these grassy knobs for as far as the eye could see. And they're really quite remarkable for their topology and globally almost unique. There's really, for the depth and breadth of the hills, there's really only one place comparable that's found in China. And so I learned about successional and alien species that were invading this area, loss of fire and overgrazing as being threats. And so I decided that I wanted to kind of take something on myself. And one of the reasons for that, some of the motivations for doing that, is I wanted my kids, and I have two kids, really wanted them to experience this idea of a roaming place. And, for me personally as well. But I also had a sense that I could do something more substantial than just periodic volunteering, and really put my money where my mouth is, and not be a hypocrite about it. And so, that spurred me on. And at this time, around the turn of millennium, there was a lot more talk about trying to think about your lifestyles, and your ecological footprint and your carbon footprint. And I felt like maybe this would be an opportunity to, if nothing else, at least partly offset the substantial footprint that I have, because I have, I have a car, I have, a house, I run a research laboratory. Those are all pretty intensive endeavors, and I could, maybe offset that, because prairies are great at carbon sequestration, for example, while at the same time restoring biodiversity to a degraded system. And I also really wanted the intellectual freedom to pursue restoration under my own oversight, instead of following somebody else's directions. So I had created some search criteria for myself. I felt like I needed to have it within about an hour's drive of Omaha, so I could spend part of the day up there working without having to make it an overnight trip. Ideally, I was looking for a substantial unplowed land with native flora. I didn't really want to reconstruct a prairie, because I saw how that worked as a kid. And it's a lot, it's weedy and other things, and there's a lot of upfront costs. But if I could find a remnant to restore instead, and ideally looking for something less than 20 acres, because I wanted something that I thought I could reasonably restore and maintain within a budget. And I didn't want any buildings on it, because I didn't want something else to take care of. And if you know that, buildings and you're trying to burn, they're not always compatible, and it really makes things complicated. So the Loess Hills seemed to be the best bet. It's close to Omaha, had tracts of unplowed landscape and native prairie that I learned about. And so I started looking for land maybe that might be a good candidate. And I identified this in about 2005 and 6 near Pisgah. From the aerial photo that was available, I could kind of see some cedar infested, a lot of cedars growing on here, but maybe some open ridge lines, that you can kind of make out along here that might have some prairie remnants on it. And I was actually able to get up to this corner and actually find lead plant. And I knew that was kind of an indicator species of native prairie, because it's pretty difficult to establish in reconstructions, and it has very, very deep roots. With the roads on the east and west and crop grout on the north and south, it seemed really well suited to supporting prescribed burns. So that was a good favorability. But it was 3 times bigger than I was looking for, and the owner wouldn't subdivide it. So it's almost 60 acres. And it was also impossible to walk through with all the cedars. And if you don't know what dense cedar stand looks like, here it is. So it has all of these branches that will tear at you, and the intensive shade basically blocks the sunlight from reaching the ground, and it just becomes kind of bare dirt and duff. And so I I was struggling with whether or not to go ahead with the purchase. And there's some more story to it that I'm going to leave in for you to read in my book if you're curious about sort of the circumstances that led me to it. But basically, the bottom line is I decided to take a leap of faith and buy the property. You know, I had approached the Nature Conservancy about possibly buying it, but you know, they're pragmatic, and you know, this wasn't really close to anything that they were, you know, working on, and really honestly it was kind of far gone, so it didn't seem like a very good candidate for them. And so you're kind of stuck in this, you know, no man's land about this idea, you know, if I don't do something, this will probably just get worse and the prairie will be lost. And so if not me, who? If not now, when? If not here, where? And so, you know, those questions haunted me, and eventually, like I decided, like I said, I kind of took a leap of faith and bought the whole thing. Best thing I ever did. And some of my early discoveries, you know, after that first year, I discovered the Iowa Geographic Map Server at Iowa State, and they have historical photos going back to the 1930s, and they show that the land had once been grassland and not plowed, which was really fun to see. And I'll show you some of those pictures in a minute. It had been heavily grazed. In fact, there were cattle on it when I came there, and it was pretty much grazed down to the turf. But in the first year after the cattle were removed, I noticed several unusual plants that I hadn't seen before. And this reinforced my belief that this was really someplace special. And one of the ones that had just absolutely took me my breath away were the passiflowers. And I have a lot of passiflowers on this property. It's something that I've described as an earthly manifestation of pure sunlight. Another one that was pretty cool is the downy yellow painted cup. It's a hemiparasitic plant native to grasslands. And this cutleaf iron plant, which was really unusual too. So, you know, I just got such a kick out of seeing all of these new plants and trying to learn them. So here's the 1938 aerial photo. And you can see that it roughly has two parallel ridge lines running north and south. And these are all free of trees in this 1930s photograph, along with kind of a central valley and some cuts in between them. And by the 1950s, some of the encroachment has now made these hills a little bit better defined. And by the 1970s, you could start seeing scattered cedars here and there finding their way up the ridges. And sometime after the 1960s, the road changed course. They regraded it and also introduced some terraces as well, presumably because there was some erosion problems because it was probably being pretty heavily grazed. And by the 1990s, you could see a lot of cedars now along these ridge lines. And by the time that I bought it, it was pretty much all mostly enclosed. So how do you start a project like this? You know, you can really get paralyzed by indecision, and it's not very helpful. And you kind of have to just scrape it off and start where you can get in. And this happened to be the place that I could get to. And I took a picture after I cut my first branch on the cedar. And this is what it looked like in July of 27 when I started. And basically the idea was to get rid of the smallest cedars first along the tops of the ridges, drag them off the ridge line and pile them for later burning, limb up the surrounding, the branches off the surrounding trees, let lights, you know, permeate, infiltrate to the ground so that you could reestablish some of the grasses and forbs, and then, you know, knock those down eventually and repeat the process iteratively down slope. And so after a year of work, this is what it looked like in 2008. There's my son there, and 2022, and you can see that I'm making some progress. It's still work to do, but this is one spot in a large area. But I realized that I was never going to be able to finish this myself. And the West was still waiting for me, the Western half. And so I decided to do a mechanical shearing project, which I got U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Loess Hills Stewardship Alliance cost share to do to grind down the cedars at about 10 acres. And this is what a forestry mulcher looks like. It looks like a bobcat bulldozer with a giant chipper shredder on it. And it just basically grinds all of this stuff to cedar shavings. And you know, when I came to look at the pictures, and a lot of these pictures were, I think, taken by Matt Dolphin, it looked like a wasteland. How could anything recover from that? I was wondering whether I in fact made a mistake and this was a bad idea. But over the course of the intervening 10 or so years, especially with some prescribed burns that I'll talk about, the prairie has recovered really nicely. And so it was worthwhile. There's still some work to do because the forestry mulcher couldn't reach some of the steeper parts, but I had to do those by hand. But it was a really good start, and I could get through the prairie that way. And so I also hosted a series of summer intern crews from Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. Some of you may recognize some of these faces, but this was my first crew. Worked on the western side, helping me clear some cedars from the western ridge line. And the second crew that helped me on the eastern side, and there's that little post right up here that I was taking a picture from earlier. And this was the third one that also involved some folks from the Loess Hills State Forest. And so I've had a little help from friends, and it's really been fun to work with the young people and see them working on the landscape. It's something that I'm happy to do. And so here it is again in 2007, and that's where that first picture was taken right here, that notch that had been cut through the hillside by a bulldozer in some years past. And after 2008, after the forestry mulcher went through, this is how it opened up the western flank. And over the course of the next few years, it's got progressively more open. In 2013, I was able to have a prescribed burn done, which was a collaborative effort between the Nature Conservancy, Fish and Wildlife, Iowa DNR, INHF, and the Harrison County Conservation Board. And I was able to burn this in February. Probably doesn't seem so surprising given the weather we've had now, but it actually worked out pretty well. And this is what it looked like afterward. And so it was kind of weedy to start, but it really started the process of restoration beautifully. And I also had a fire about 5 years later, and I snapped this picture because I just thought it was cool. How it kind of slowly removed and turned to ash this elm tree that had fallen down and left the branches and a ghostly imprint of its structure on the ground. And so after the summer of 2013, after that burn, everything looks very nice and green. I opened up some more of these areas on this slope. And after 2021, now you can see there's still more progress, more work to do, but continued progress. And so I'm going to show you just a few slides now, kind of taking from a single point. After that 2018 burn, I took some pictures from this vantage point, and the grass. It was burned in May, so the grass starts returning pretty quickly after that. And by early spring, late spring, early summer, midsummer, late summer, early fall, late fall, and winter. I'm up there all the time. Pretty much any time that I'm here for the weekend, I'm up there at least one day, and I enjoy every single season. And in the wintertime, I like to burn some of the brush that or slash piles that I have when there's snow on the ground, and take pictures of flowers that adopt a completely different look to them when they've got snow on them. So I, bring my camera around and I like to take pictures of the flora and fauna. And so the work strategy and health benefits. So, I'm thinking about this now in terms of my own health and what I needed to accomplish. And, I needed to balance the pressing need to restore the prairie with time for personal reflection and recreation. If you're working all hard and then you just leave, you don't really get to enjoy the place. So the way I sort of did that was take up a chainsaw and a single tank of gas, and when I ran out and wasn't going to fill it again, and gave me enough material to kind of put away and have time for a nice lunch in the hills and roam around for a while and then go home. And it was just always just a really great day. Whatever stressors I had seemed to just disappear. And over time, I noticed benefits to my upper body strength, my balance, endurance, and stress levels. When you're running around hills doing chainsaw work, it's a good workout. So this was my workout in my gym membership. And over the years, I really was taken, especially by past flowers, and how much life was here on this prairie. And these are all this sort of collage of pictures, all pictures that I took from the past flowers on my prairie, and you can see all sorts of kinds of visitors, from bees to flies to ants to bugs to spiders who are hunting to caterpillars to grasshoppers to butterflies. And the abundance of past flowers here really makes me think that this provides good evidence of the keystone species, something that really drives the ecological dynamics and robustness of this ecosystem, especially early in the spring. And these are, you look at it, you can see all the abundant pollen here. It's just a rich food source for all the critters. But they're not the only flowers.
Patrick,
Yes.
Patrick, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
You're having a little bit of and maybe it's just me, but I don't think it is. You're having a little bit of an audio issue. We can hear you, but it's almost like you're cutting out back and forth from a mic or something. It might have to do with when you're using your keyboard. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
it just makes it a little bit hard to hear. We still can hear you though. I just wanted to alert you in case there was a little fix that you knew of that you could do.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It could be just my internet, and it's not quite as robust as I'd hoped. So I will maybe not move my cursor then, in case that might be an issue. But thank you for that, Kelly. And I will try to also speak a little bit louder in case that's an issue too. So as I mentioned, I was taken by past flowers, but they're not the only flower there. I've got lots of other flowers, and I've taken not to just photograph flowers by themselves anymore. I'm really interested in all of the life that attends them, including this like snowberry clearwing and this silver spotted skipper on the loco weed. And I have lots of other examples of that, and it's one of the pastimes that I have in exploring this place. And this one's a pretty cool one. I noticed this caterpillar on this tall green milkweed, and it took me a while to kind of figure out what it was, but it's actually a moth called an unexpected Cytsnia. This is a milkweed specialist, but dryland milkweed, so you don't see it really on common milkweed. And I came back the next week and was able to find it on the same plant, and it's a really pretty nondescript moth, but it's kind of uncommon. And I felt like that was a really neat find. And these are the kinds of things that I really enjoy. I also have some trail cameras, and I pointed it on this den that I thought was active, and I picked up a badger. And it was the same camera here just a couple of days later, and I picked up this coyote with a part of a raccoon on it. It looks like it was really involved in a fight. You can see it's all torn up, and just about 30 minutes later, the coyote's coming back from the opposite direction, maybe to pick up the rest of the raccoon that it killed. And if you notice the date, it's August, so it's puppy time and feeding a family. And so you can see that there's a lot of drama in this place, and a lot of it you never ever see. And one of the guys who hunts my property during archery season recently took this picture, and it's on the west side of a bobcat and moving along the ridgeline. And we had burned it, or had it burned in late summer. And that was a cool find. It would be, repeatedly coming across in this direction as if it were making a circle. And so, sometimes people ask you about your land and what you call it. And I always kind of hesitated, you don't really want to call it something after yourself. I kind of get tired of names, prairies that are named after people. And it really doesn't seek to give its own identity. And it happened that I attended a seminar by Catherine Smythe Xavier, who was giving a talk at Creighton on sustainability projects and other things that they're developing. And she's a historian and works on talking about people and their interplay with nature. And she alerted me to this book called Wisdom Sits in Places, and it talks about place naming of the Western Apache. And in that oral tradition, place naming is meant to evoke an image of a place based on its name. And so it's not unique to the Apache. Lots of indigenous cultures use it, and it's often associated with culturally significant stories or natural resources. And it's so accurate that they've been able to find them again after years of sort of almost forgetting that they exist. And one of my favorite names from that book is translated as "water flows inward under a cottonwood tree." And you can almost imagine a brook or creek, curving in and eroding the stream bank under an overhanging cottonwood. It's very visual. And so I was thinking about that idea, and I was really inspired by that tradition. And I was looking through some pictures, and I saw this one, and a name sort of appeared in my head, and I was kind of working on it. And I named it Bur Oaks Gaze on Little Sioux Ridge Rising. And it's named for the bur oaks that are behind me in this picture. And they're overlooking the southern end of the Loess Hills State Forest, the Little Sioux unit of the Loess Hills State Forest. And it comes out of the surrounding floodplain of the Missouri and the Soldier River. And you can almost imagine in your mind's eye, 300 years ago when this was wet prairie and a braided stream flowing through, and maybe a small herd of bison that was wandering down from the north, or maybe a fire that was racing along the ridge line with stiff southern breezes. It just evokes something in my mind's eye that I find very appealing, and I wish I could have seen it then, but I can imagine it now. So one of the things that happened during this intervening time is that Pope Francis published an encyclical called Laudato Si on the care of our common home. And I'm at Creighton University. It's a Catholic Jesuit institution. And I was interested in hearing and kept an open mind about what was said in this encyclical. And I found that many of the things that he was saying, I actually really struck me and aligned with some of my strongly held beliefs. And I'm going to share two of those sections. This is section 33. It is not enough, however, to think of different species merely as potential resources to be exploited, while overlooking the fact that they have value in themselves. Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species, which we will never know, which our children will never see, because they have been lost forever. The great majority become extinct for reasons related to human activity. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. We have no such right. And I think I really relate to this because it identifies or speaks to the rights of nature, and also kind of talks about this injustice between generations, when one generation decides they don't need to care about the land and robs the future generations of ever being able to witness it. The last one I will share with you is this one from section 85. God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. The Canadian bishops rightly pointed out that no creature is excluded from this manifestation of God. From panoramic vistas to the tiniest living form, nature is a constant source of wonder and awe. It is also a continuing revelation of the divine. And for me, you look at that panoramic vista that I showed you previous to that, and if you don't feel anything, you kind of wonder, what you value. And I find it just a beautiful sight. And there's so many of those in the Loess Hills, almost too many to name. But it's the little things too that are so amazing to me. So when I've been working on my prairie and creating these, pushing back the cedars, the response has been really interesting and overwhelming, really. So, for example, on this hillside that I cleared those cedar trees on, I had this flush bloom of all this loco weed, and I captured a monarch butterfly flying through. And on the right-hand side here, you've got a showy goldenrod, and this picture had like 6 different insects on it. And so it's really amazing. And so that always sort of inspired me to keep working. And one my takeaway, hopefully, that you can see is that individual effort consistently applied over time can yield substantial results. And if I asked the critters what they thought of my work, I think they'd say, hey, he's doing a good job. And I think that's enough for me, because the observing of the beauty and reflecting on the wonder and the flora and fauna that live their lives in the space you helped create is thanks enough for the effort you give. For me, whatever I've given to this place, it's been returned tenfold. No questions. So it's really important that we start trying to reverse this trend of degradation, because nature is declining at global declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history. If you look at grasslands down here on the right-hand corner, we've seen like a 50% change in proportion of species declining since 1970. And so grasslands are really imperiled. But the report also tells us that it's not too late to make a difference, but only if we start now at every level from local to global. Through transformative change, nature can be conserved, restored, and used sustainably. And, what I hope to my restoration work, hopefully allows you to see that nature is resilient if it's just given a chance to recover. And so some of my ongoing efforts include long-term protection via a conservation easement that the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation holds. We've been able to do some more prescribed burns, and I've also started a forest stewardship plan with the DNR and NRCS. And what I was trying to do there is I've lost a lot of big ash trees from emerald ash borer. And I've also have a lot of kind of invasive big mulberry trees, white mulberry trees. And I want to create some forest openings and replace those trees with native bare seedlings. And here, what you're seeing up here is a sycamore tree that I planted in the spring of 2023. And by the end of 2024, it was already 9 feet tall. And also, I had some unexpected, beautiful native wildflowers like this wing stem grow in light. And I also started wanting to tell stories. And I know that you heard Chris Helzer talking about prairies, and he's a big proponent of telling stories about grasslands. And so that sort of partly motivated my work on trying to write some of these things. There were just not that much to me that sort of had this interplay of spirituality or faith and prairie restoration. And I wanted to at least tell my story as best I could. So I published a book on that, and that came out in 2018. And then Kelly's on the call, so she started this low-high trek, and I started on the first one, and I felt like people need to know about this, and so I decided to publish some of these essays about the low-high treks and native wildflowers on the Bleeding Heartland blog out of Des Moines with Laura Damon, who's been a wonderful editor and willing to host my stories. I also responded to a call for papers from the Ecological Solutions and Evidence, and they were celebrating the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And so I submitted a paper, and they seemed to like it, and published it. And then finally, I really kind of, as mentioned in the introduction, it kind of has this now intersection between my interest in restoration and my teaching. And so I kind of blended them to create this medical humanities course called Restorative Recreation, relating nature prescription, avocation, and creation care. And just to briefly highlight kind of the things that I cover, it's a 5-week elective course for first and second year medical students. It's 2 hours a week. It's discussion centered, and it's capped at 12 students. Week 1 talks about nature deficit disorder, which probably many of you have heard of, coined by Richard Louv. It's this idea that kids are not getting outdoors enough, and it's associated with metabolic and behavioral deficits that we're seeing in our kids. I describe my childhood as being sort of a free-range kid, and I think we've really lost that. And nature, week 2 talks about nature immersion and the action of nature prescription, actually prescribing nature as approaches to improve human health. Now, week 3 takes some of the selected readings from Laudato Si, as I mentioned before, some of those passages that I highlighted, as well as readings and citations from other kinds of faith traditions and indigenous teachings. And week 4, brings in this idea of restorative recreation and the importance of avocations in sort of the physician lifestyle, because these are medical students, but more broadly to the rest of us as a way of separating ourselves from our vocations and the actions of restoration to restore self, community, and ecosystems. And last, I take them on a field trip to Hitchcock Nature Center, where we can kind of blend all of these together and look at Badger Ridge and see the awe and wonder of the Loess Hills and the native plants and the restoration work that's been ongoing, and just have them feel, which is great for them because they're in class so long and there's so much stress. They need this just as much as I did. So if you ask for some suggestions from me, one thing that I would suggest is trying to commit to an ecological tithe. A tithe is a tenth. It's means many faith traditions ask for a tenth of your time, talent, and treasure to support the work of that religious institution. And so similarly, I say, you know, for each hour of outdoor recreation, you devote a tenth of that time to restorative recreation, something that actually produces nature, is good for nature. So that's really the question. How am I good for nature? And devote 1/10 of your home property to wildflower or vegetable gardens and go organic, ideally, if you can. And I think that really helps build a lifestyle of reciprocity. And many of you have probably read Robin Wall Kimmerer and sort of the gift economy and this idea of giving and receiving. If you can, volunteer for stewardship work days. I found them remarkable. Everything from invasive species removal, seed planting, collecting, prescribed burning, litter removal, anything that benefits the local area where you work and it's accessible, you can actually begin to see the effects of your work and efforts. And always advocating for restoring and connecting natural landscapes. The rest of life that lives here deserves a place to live, and so we have to actively work for that. And don't be afraid to try something new, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just try to learn from them, and I made some, and I tried to learn from them. And it's really more than a labor of love. Restorative recreation is a labor of life. I often get, have that said to me, oh, this is such a wonderful labor of love. And I try to remind them, no, it's really a labor of life. It's about all life, not just my life, but the rest of the life that lives here. And so, of course, I'm working on a pretty large scale, which is beyond what most people can do. But you can do this in your backyard. And so I have a wildflower garden that I've put in my backyard, and I've been working on it for many years. And most recently, a lot of plants from Midwest Native Nursery have gone into this garden. And it's really an enjoyable way of bringing things home to your landscape. And it's really remarkable what can find their way to these places if you just spend some time creating them. And so the last thing that I want to do is share a poem that I wrote, cited for the last Lo-Fi Trek, which kind of is a synopsis of many of the things that I think about and how we treat the Loess Hills. So this is Loess Hills Life. I see you passing through my landscape, immersed in your thoughts and conversations, finding your path and assessing your place, grappling with your emotions, using me to work them out. I am here for you, but I am here too, surrounding your journey, stimulating your senses, showing myself if you look my way. I am Loess Hills Life. Do you see me? I have stories too. My many lives have names and faces. My many lives intersect in community. My many lives sustain life journeys. My many lives yearn to be understood. Do you know me? I have struggles too. My foundations are weakening. My many songs are fading. My strands of life are being severed. My travelers find their passage perilous. Do you hear me? I have needs too. I need cleansing fire. I need dynamic circles of life renewed. I need unburdening from non-native species. I need my broken backbone mended. Will you help me? Can we heal each other? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Swanson.